It is Monday, and that means it's time for another book discussion. I am Mr. Sesatris. Welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for watching this video. Today, I wanted to talk about those rare instances where a movie adaptation of a book is better than the book. And I know you're saying that that's not possible because books are always better, but in a few cases it does happen. Most of the time, the book is always better. There's a great many movie adaptations of books that are just absolute garbage. And there's some that are just as good as the book, like they function really well. And then there's others that just have a little certain something extra when translating into the movie medium, and they just stand out in some way and really blow the audience away, and as a result have become kind of classics in their own right. And so today I'm going to talk about 3 of them. Now, I should start off by saying that all of these books that I chose are good books to begin with. There are a few cases where there's like a terrible book that becomes a really good movie because the bar was set really low to begin with. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about genuinely good books that were adapted for film, and the film transcended the book and became sort of a pop culture icon in its own right. And so first up, I wanted to talk about Jurassic Park. Now, I love this book. It's been a favorite of mine since forever. I've had this copy since, like, I was in junior high. The book is genuinely wonderful. It is a really taut, scary horror thriller, techno thriller. It digs into all of the questions about human nature and chaos and power and capitalism and all the fun stuff that we really love. And I really do love the book. The movie took a good book and it streamlined it. The movie sort of focused in on what impacted the audience the most, what grabbed their attention the most, and it ran with it. The movie also does a really good job of blending the wonder with the fear, which is really hard to do, and I feel like Steven Spielberg is one of the few people who could really pull that off, because there's this sense of awe and grandeur in the movie that there's lots of really positive, uplifting, soaring, triumphant moments. Whereas the book is much more gritty, it's much more tense. It starts off with kind of a series of vignettes of like strange things happening and people getting attacked, and there's a mystery to be solved because there's creatures lurking in the jungles on the mainland in South America, and there's something that's going on, and so you kind of uncover that as you go. And it's a really effective book structure. It really, really works well as the book. I think for a movie it would have been a little too all over the place. They use a scene from the beginning of the book in the opening of the second movie, The Lost World, where the little girl gets attacked by all the little dinosaurs on the beach. That's actually from the beginning of this book. There's lots of stuff kind of going on. There's many moving parts, but the movie, I think, streamlines it really well and just gives it a really good pace. It knows when to slow down without getting boring. It knows when to speed up without getting too chaotic and losing the audience. It knows where its focus needs to be, and it knows that what we care about are the characters, and it keeps the spotlight on each of those characters. In the book, it's more about, it's more of a big picture kind of thing. We do follow the characters and their various things, but it's more about how is this big picture going to be resolved, because it's a huge problem. Everything's falling apart. We need to fix it. And so it's very much the devil's in the details. It's focusing on the specific details of this disaster and kind of seeing how it's all going to come back together and how they could resolve it. Whereas in the film, it focuses a lot on how are the people going to survive in their perspective kind of journeys, which I think works great. I really, really love that. I really also love how the characters, I think, stand out a little more. Michael Crichton is a really fantastic plotter. He writes really gripping, fast-paced stories that move along, like great detail, real good sense of kind of real life. Everything is very grounded, which I appreciate. But his characters do tend to be a little cardboard cutout y at times. His strength was in his big ideas and his plots, but the characters a lot of times kind of don't stand out in the way that they would in the movie. And the movie does a good job of giving everyone a very definite, lovable character. Everyone has their own kind of personality, and the personalities interact in different ways. And I think it really works well. Also, I feel like the movie, the age difference between Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler is still kind of, it's a little big, but I feel like in the movie they have much better chemistry, and it feels more natural. It feels like they do actually have a relationship. In the book, it's a little, because she's like a student and he's the the professor kind of leading things, and the dynamic is a little off. In the film, it's very clear that she's more of a kind of leader along with him. Like they're both kind of in leadership roles, which I think works really well, and I like that dynamic. Speaking of that, I love Laura Dern so much, so much. She's the best. And her character just really is a standout in the film. She is, I mean, she's depicted as a strong character in the book as well, but I feel like in the film she just has a presence, a stage presence that really works well, and she stands up really well against everyone else, and her dynamic with all the different characters is really natural and organic, and the whole cast just works really, really well together. I love it. But mostly I love Laura Dern because she's perfect. And also, I think Hammond's arc in the film is a little more satisfying. It's more gruesome in the book. This is a spoiler if you haven't read the book, but like, it's from the 90s, 1990. And in the book, he ends up dying at the end, kind of unredeemed. He's sort of, he's so angry at his vision falling apart, and he's so angry at no one believing that this could work, that he sort of runs off into the jungle at the end and falls down a cliff and gets attacked by a bunch of the little compies, little compsognathus dinosaurs, and then he dies, and that's kind of it. In the film, we get to see him realize what it means to have power over something, and you get that really great conversation between him and Ellie when they're like frantically eating all the ice cream before it melts, and talking about the illusion of power. And he doesn't seem to really get it in that conversation. They argue, but by the end of it, he sort of come to realize, you know what, this isn't working, and I cannot control this. And so, when Alan Grant says, I've decided not to endorse your park, and he says, so have I, and then they leave. I don't know. It's a little cutesy Hollywood happy ending, but I genuinely like that better. I feel like when you're reading the book, the tone of the book is a little darker and grittier, and so Hammond's end in the book works for that kind of medium. But when you're talking about kind of whenever I look back at the ending of the book, it's always like, oh yeah, he dies. But when you look back at the movie, you're like, yeah, okay, he has this arc where he goes from just assuming that he knows everything and everyone should just adore him because of what he's done because he has money, to at the end realizing that he's a failure, and his grand idea is a failure. And I think that really works well as a character arc. It's very satisfying, which I love. And also, talking about the ending of the movie is much less ambiguous. I mean, the medium of film is such that kind of ending sort of works. But I'm not like books and movies are very different media, but in the book, the ending is sort of, it ends, and then there's kind of this coda where they go back to the island and they're studying the dinosaurs, and they kind of see the effects of this genetic engineering. You know, some of them are now exhibiting like certain reptile traits that they wouldn't normally have, and they kind of discover the main nest, I think, of the velociraptors is what they discover at the end. And then they leave, and then like they firebomb the island from the air and kill all the dinosaurs. And I don't know, it as a story, like in terms of the story, it does make sense. I think that was probably like the smart decision. But in the movie, I feel like leaving and letting the island fall into a natural state of chaos fits the theme of the movie a lot better. And I just genuinely really like that, because it's sort of, there's all the while you're talking about chaos and trying to control nature, and you can't, because nature is an organic system that moves on its own and operates according to its like so many rules that it sort of is just chaotic. But it's a natural chaos, and that's good. And I feel like letting the dinosaurs live on the island and just leaving it um, probably isn't the smartest decision, but it fits the theme of the story better, and I genuinely really like that. So I do like this book. It is still a big favorite of mine, but I feel like the film is such a pop culture juggernaut because of the things that were trimmed out and the things that were focused on in terms of character that really keeps it a successful film. So that's Jurassic Park. Next up, I wanted to talk about another 90s. Well, actually, the book isn't from the 90s, but the movie's from the 90s because that's my favorite decade. And that is The Hunt for the Red October by Tom Clancy. And yes, I know this is the series tie-in cover. Don't come for me. I lost my original version years ago, and it makes me mad. And it doesn't match the rest of the books that I have, but I had to have it, so I got this one. And this is the only one that they have, and I couldn't find this one used because it's a good one, and so this is the only one I could find. So just get over it, and we'll just move on if we can. All right. So Hunt for Red October. Again, this is a fantastic book. This is written in the 80s, and the book works really, really well for what it does. The characters, again, aren't maybe as gripping, although I think Tom Clancy is better at writing character. Jack Ryan and Marco Ramius do kind of jump off the page in this as very unique characters. So I do genuinely like that. The thing that I think works better in the film version, the one starring Alec Baldwin and Sean Connery, is that the focus on the two main characters is a little tighter. In this one, we don't get as many scenes with Ramius. He's sort of an unknown, and that works because in the book, you really don't know whether to trust him or not. The movie makes it very clear fairly early on that you're meant to trust him and that he's not a bad guy, but the book kind of lets you stew for a bit longer and doesn't really reveal what's going on. So as a result, you don't spend a lot of time with him. You're not inside his head as much as you are in the film, and it works for the book. But it does make certain sections feel a little frustrating because you want to get back onto the Red October. You want to learn more about him because he is a really engaging character, and you want to get into his head more, and you don't really get that until sort of later on. And so I feel like the film version, the really tight focus on Jack Ryan and Marco Ramius works really well because we kind of know from the get-go these two are awesome, and we really want them to team up because obviously there's something that they're both trying to accomplish, and they can't do it unless they can meet. So the film, the focus on that is sort of how do we get these two characters together so they can kind of logic their way out of this problem and find a way to save everyone on this ship that they're trying to. And I think the film version really does a good job of keeping that focus on just those two characters. The book does a lot of mind hopping, and we get lots of perspectives of other people who are tangentially related to the crisis, and that does a good job of kind of giving you a feeling of the not the gravitas, the enormity of kind of what's going on, the stakes. You have a really good sense of what the stakes are in the book, and so as a result, you see kind of lots of different people. You get a good view of what it's like in the military from a lot of different perspectives, from like the leadership to kind of just the everyday person. Um, and the film keeps the focus on the main two characters, um, because the film's arcs are all about what happens when two great minds come together and work together. It's all about working together and cooperation. And I think that is why the film has sort of stood the test of time a bit. The book is very much a Cold War novel. Oh, here comes the cat again. The book is very much a Cold War novel, and it speaks to people living in that era. It speaks to people who have memories of like the Cuban Missile Crisis and that kind of stuff. And so it's speaking directly to people who are living in the Cold War. And I think the film is still very much a Cold War entity, but the focus is a lot more on, more timeless themes that stand the test of time better, which is, I think, why people still talk about the film, but maybe people aren't, frantically reading the book as much. It's probably still well read and popular because it is a good book, but I feel like the film has sort of stuck around longer in pop culture. Going off on that, I feel like the pacing of the film is almost perfect. I don't usually throw that around a lot, but I feel like the film version, Hunt for Red October, is one of the most flawlessly paced films that I've ever seen. That's probably hyperbole, but it moves so confidently from where it starts to where it ends, and it never really seems to lose steam. There's never really a part where the plot sags at all. Everything that was in the book that was sort of extraneous, that was important for world building and creating a sense of kind of what the stakes were and how it affected Russia and the U.S., that was all kind of trimmed away. And in the film, it moves from scene to scene so well that it's not one of those ones where you find yourself kind of like reading your phone or getting distracted during certain parts, because it knows where it's going. It's a really tight script, and it just moves effortlessly from beginning to end, and I just love it. And that's difficult to do. I feel like films from that time period, there was a focus on kind of speed and efficiency, and so you either got films that were very chaotic and kind of rushed through, or you got films that just found a really good balance, and I think this one works really well for that. Also, one thing that I think works better for the film is they tone down the sort of American exceptionalism, propaganda-y stuff. For example, in the book, there's a scene where they take the rescued Russian sailors and they kind of fly them over North America, over the U.S., and everyone's sort of in awe of, how wealthy everyone is, and there's this kind of very Reagan-esque kind of thing where it's like, yes, every family in the U.S. Has a house and a car, and everyone is sort of, very traditional families, the two kids and the married husband and wife, and it's a little proud of itself at times, and it sort of slows down the pacing because this is kind of near the end of the book, and the climax has kind of already happened, and so you're just kind of like, okay, what's going on, and it just feels a little preachy, whereas the film doesn't do that. The film looks at sort of the idealism that the Russian characters have about the U.S., and it explores that, and it also explores kind of the confidence bordering on arrogance of some of the American characters, but it never really feels like, the Soviet Union is evil and awful, and America is perfect and righteous, and everyone wants to be like us because we've got everything figured out. The movie humanizes the characters a little bit more, and it addresses their flaws, and it's not about, this ideological clash between nations. It's more just about, um, there's a rough situation, and two great minds, one from America and one from the USSR, need to team up to save lives, and that's the focus. It's not there is some culture clash between the two, but it's not about just, we're better and you're awful. It's let's work together because we're stronger for it, and I really, really like that. It's probably a little naive, but I think it works really well. It's very effective. And my final point is the conclusion, of how they kind of get everyone off the boat. In the film, it's a lot more streamlined. In the book, it's a lot more complicated. But I feel like in the film, they get everyone from point A to point B, and they simplify the process a bit, but it's still dramatically interesting. It's not just overcomplicating things for the sake of it. It still feels plausible. It still feels engaging, but it does it sort of in less or fewer steps, and I really, really like that. I feel like it has a more satisfying conclusion. Like I said, the book, where they get everyone off the boat, there's still kind of a whole bunch of stuff after that, and it's more about, now we have to get to harbor before they discover us, kind of thing. And it doesn't have the same immediacy, and so I feel like the pacing of the finale in the book, or in the film, just works a lot better, and I really, really love that. Plus, on top of that, the music is just awesome. The music for Jurassic Park was good too. It's one of John Williams' best scores, but I really love Basil Polidoris's score for Hunt for Red October. It's just magical. It's wonderful. So that is The Hunt for Red October. And finally, the last book I want to talk about is The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. I studied this book ad nauseum for my master's thesis, and I love it so much. But I do like the film version more. And a lot of the reasons that I've given are the same for kind of some of the other things that I've talked about. The focus on the film is a lot tighter. There's not as many side quests. And I think the plot moves forward really well. For a film that was made in 1939, I had to think about that. It still moves at a very kind of contemporary pace. I think there's a few things maybe in the beginning, like the prologue section of the film version, that I think might move a little slow for modern audiences. But for the most part, it moves along really quickly. And the film knows how to fill its talky spaces really, really well. There's a good mix of comedy and physical acting that I think works really well to keep things moving on. Even when people are just talking, all of the characters are so talented that it really keeps the focus on that, which I really, really like. And also, I think in the film, I like that the whole experience is a dream, whereas in the book, it's very much a real place. There's like a ton of sequels where, Dorothy goes back and other characters exist in it, and it's very much a living, breathing, real place with a real history. And I feel like in the film, making it a dream works better because it's more about what it represents rather than like the politics of it as a real place. And I think coming off of that, the fact that all the characters, or most of the characters, have analogs in the real world really make it all about, this is Dorothy's journey, Even though the other characters have great arcs, this is very much her story, and it's her interpreting complicated feelings that maybe she's not quite mature enough to really understand, but because she goes through all this, her mind is able to sort of unpack all of her complex emotions, and she's able to kind of arrive at kind of an understanding of things. Now, whether or not you agree that what her ultimate conclusion is is good or not, that's kind of up to you. When she says, I basically, there's no place like home and I never want to leave again, you can interpret that in different ways. But I think the fact that we're in her head for most of the film um, allows for a lot of different layers of interpretation. And because of that, I think the film works better as a fairy tale. L. Frank Baum intended the book to be sort of an American fairy tale. He wanted something that could compete with like the Grimm's brothers or Charles Perrault. And he wanted something that was sort of an American fairy tale that was rooted in the world that he saw around him. It was written in 1900, but the description of Dorothy's house at the beginning, it feels very universal. In the book, it also works when you're looking at it through the lens of the Great Depression, and so I think he was wanting to kind of take American things. And create sort of an iconic fairy tale. And the book is genuinely really well done. It's a classic in its own right, but I think the film really distilled it down further so that the film really does feel like that kind of prototypical iconic fairy tale that Baum was going for, because we've seen the film more than the book is what catapulted it into pop culture. And then you see remakes and copies and sequels and expansions on this. This is a place that people really want to keep revisiting because it's so iconic, and it has that kind of platonic ideal of like a fairy tale. Like it fits alongside Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and all that. Like it works. It works in that framework, and I think that's why the film is ultimately more successful. I also really like how the characters in the film have more to do. In the book, they're very much archetypes, but in the film, they're more personalities. They're still archetypes in their own way, but it's more about their distinct personalities, and we as the audience relate to them in different ways. And I'm not just talking about the three companions, but also Margaret Hamilton as the Wicked Witch of the West. She's not just a one-dimensional cackling villain. She could be that, but I think Margaret Hamilton added a layer of frustration to her character that makes it so much more engaging. She's not just evil because she wants to be evil. She's angry about something, and we don't really get a sense of what that is. I mean, obviously she's angry that her sister was killed, but there's something else there. There's a depth to the character that Margaret Hamilton infused her with that we don't really get. And I think that's why she's so compelling. And that's why, obviously, we have something like Wicked, the book series, as well as the musical, because it was really trying to get at why is she the way that she is? What resentment is she holding on to? And I think that depth is part of what makes it so successful. In the book, she's kind of a very strange sort of character. She's kind of goofy, and she's more childish and kind of angry, and like she's just kind of evil for the sake of it. She's just sort of like an imp kind of character. But in the film, she really feels like a real person, and she really feels like someone who is angry at the world for some reason. And I think that's why we're so drawn to her. And I just love that. The other characters are great too. The Cowardly Lion, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and Dorothy herself. I think Judy Garland adds so much to her, where she could very easily just be kind of a damsel, and instead we get someone who she's kind of learning what agency is. She's learning to wield it, and she still has people helping her because, of course, she's a child. No child should be expected to face the world on their own and have to grow up too soon. But she's understanding what agency is, and I just really, really love that. And on top of all that, the film is just gorgeous. The book has some really wonderful illustrations. W. Denslow was the illustrator for the original edition of the book, and his art style is really iconic and really beautiful. But I think just the visual style of the film is very, not simplistic, but again, it just, everything extraneous was kind of stripped away, and it's just a series of kind of dream images. And it's so captivating. I love the style of it. I love the flow of the story. I love how it very much sticks to kind of the hero's journey archetype, and it feels like it's something that I think is going to stick around for quite a while. So I hope it does. So those are my 3 picks. I know there's others that we could possibly talk about. There's lots of books that have been adapted into films that are just as good as the books, or maybe not as good as the book, but still really good on their own. There's some films that have really successfully taken a book into a film medium without really adding anything new, but adapting it in a way that I think the spirit of the book comes through. I'm thinking of like The Life of Pi. I feel like the film did a really good job of capturing the feel of the book. But what are some others? I'm curious to hear kind of your picks. What are some films that are adapted from books that you think really work better than the original book? For that matter, what are some of your favorite absolutely awful film adaptations of books that just besmirch the very name of the book and make you just want to burn every copy of the film in into oblivion because it just disrespected the source material so much. I'm curious about that too. I may make a video about that in the future. We'll have to see how that goes. But for now, I will leave you and say enjoy your week.